Most longtime DBD fans would agree, it's not really much of a scary game, but in May of 2022, Behavior aimed to set this right. This anniversary, they explicitly set out to create a scary chapter, and they aim to do this with their monstrous new killer, the Dredge. The Dredge has the ability to trap survivors in near total darkness, snatch them up out of hiding places, and teleporter on the map to sneak up on survivors. You could easily see how this could be one of the most oppressive kits in the game. That's why today I wanted to tell you about one of the strongest killers currently in Dead by Daylight. The Dredge. Wait a second, you're telling me that's wrong? Hold on, let me cross-reference my sources really quick. Yeah, so unfortunately the Dredge didn't live up to expectations. But at a first glance, he seems fine to the average player, right? Well, that's because Dredge's problems are very complex and beyond fixing with just simple number buffs. So that's where I come in. Today I'm going to be taking a deep dive into the Dredge to see what kind of problems he has and suggesting solutions on how to fix them. But before we get into all that, I just want to give a massive thank you once again for all the support on my Trickster video. That was a mostly unscripted giant passion project where I just screamed into the microphone about my thoughts on my favorite killer, so I wasn't really expecting anyone to watch it. But since that video did as well as it did, I figured I might as well take the opportunity to talk about some other killers I've had on my mind. Welcome to yet another DBD case study, where on this episode I'm going to be taking a look at the Dredge. Let me give you a rundown of his power now, since that intro was, just a little bit exaggerated. When charging his power, you have two options, to either teleport to a locker, very slowly, or to teleport to your remnant, which you leave behind as you start charging the power. This second option is meant to be your chase tool. Exiting a locker or teleporting to the remnant will both put your power on cooldown for 12 entire seconds. This cooldown makes you have to be very careful about when you decide to teleport. For reference, this cooldown is longer than both Blight and Twins' entire powers, and just as long as Wesker's power takes to recharge 2 bounds. But thankfully, you can reduce the cooldown significantly by entering Nightfall. Nightfall is a passive ability unique to Dredge, which adds a unique day-night cycle effect into the game. And while I said it was passive, it charges pretty slow on its own. The significant ways you're meant to charge it is by injuring survivors and leaving them injured, hooking survivors, teleporting to the remnant, or by sitting inside of lockers, which is the fastest way to build your power. When Nightfall is active, your teleport speed is massively increased, the cooldown of your power is decreased to only 4 seconds, and you trigger Killer Instinct on nearby survivors whenever you teleport. Additionally, you become undetectable, which makes it so survivors can't track you without a clear line of sight.
I am the spy.
Survivors can also lock the lockers at any point, which increases the time it takes for you to exit from them, but also makes them completely unusable until it's broken. You can break locks as Dredge by either hitting them with a basic attack, or by exiting the locker while inside of it. Well, now that's all the basics covered, so you notice any problems yet? Don't worry, if you haven't, we're going to go through them one by one now, starting with the teleport. Dredge was very obviously designed to be the teleporting killer. Being able to teleport around the map from anywhere is a pretty big deal. A lot of the best killers in this game have a mobility option that lets them get around the map quickly. So having that be your primary power sounds like it would be pretty strong, right? So then that begs the question, what makes Dredge so weak? Well, as I showed before, Dredge's teleport is slow. He only moves at 12 meters per second while teleporting to lockers, which means that even on a small map like Coal Tower, you have to spend several seconds off the map just moving to a locker which you might not even want to be at once you exit. This also means that teleporting to a locker mid-chase is out of the question because it's so slow that survivors can easily react to it. Pretty much the only way you're going to use a locker teleport during a chase is during Nightfall because the speed is actually fast enough to catch up to survivors before they can react. And while teleporting to the remnant in chase is very fast, it's kind of a 50-50 and it slows you down a lot. You'll have to very intentionally try to zone survivors into it, and even if you do, you might not get anything out of it. And again, using either of these options puts your power on a 12-second cooldown. You could almost achieve Bloodlust in that time and it'd be better. So for now, let's just keep a mental note of all that and move on to problem 2, Nightfall. From the way I described Nightfall, you wouldn't really think there's much of a problem with it, but it quickly falls apart when you start comparing it to other killers. The closest example I can provide is Oni. He's a normal M1 killer that builds up his power over time slowly as well, but here's the thing, Oni earns his power with just 2 basic attacks. And he also makes injured survivors leave blood orbs around the map that he can collect to charge his power even faster. Once he's in his power, he gets access to a high-speed sprint that he can use to get around the map, outplay tiles, and use his insta-down. He also has the appealing benefit of a skill curve to his power that players can master over time. Compare this to Dredge, who only gets improvements to his already shit power and doesn't have much of a skill curve to it at all. And Nightfall takes several minutes to charge on its own, and boosting it isn't as fast as it is for Oni. Pretty much the best thing Nightfall has going for it is the fact that it's an accessibility issue for survivors. As a survivor, this is what Nightfall looks like without any filters. While I can see just fine, I imagine someone with relatively poor eyesight won't be able to see anything at all. And God forbid they might be colorblind, losing their vision, playing on a TV in a well-lit room, etc. This can get bad really fast. I don't know why they don't just do something similar to the lights out modifier, which has a custom lighting for the entire map. We already know this is possible with killers like Freddy who can control map lighting client side. I feel like this would have been a better option since it gives more consistent lighting across every map and would also give the devs precise control over how much the survivors can see. But that's about all I have to say about Nightfall, so let's move on to the next topic, counterplay. So on top of all the other problems I mentioned, Dredge also has an abundance of built-in counterplay. As I mentioned at the start, you can lock lockers as a survivor at any point, which might as well turn off Dredge's power for the entire game until they're broken. If Dredge teleports to a locked locker, he's pretty much useless. It takes him so long to come out and he makes so much noise that survivors can easily see it coming and make enough distance. But why bother with placing the locks when he's already slow enough coming out of them as is? I mean, just look at this clip where I teleport nearly on top of this Claudette and she still makes enough distance to make a pallet. This killer's power is so non-threatening that I don't even understand why it has the lock counterplay in the first place. And you might start wondering, well, what about Nightfall? Don't you get free undetectable during Nightfall? And while that's true, the undetectable is practically useless because you're also playing one of the most noisy characters in the game. Take a quick listen at this footage. I'm sure you can hear the whooshing sound by now, and that sound follows you wherever you walk during Nightfall. It follows you around like a mini terror radius, making you audible through walls and floors easily. Not to mention the constant squelching and meaty sounds you make all the time regardless of whether you're in Nightfall or not. It's extremely creepy and well done sound design, but it just doesn't work right for a PvP video game. This is supposed to be a jump scare character, but since you can hear him at all times, it kind of reduces the scare factor a lot. And honestly, that's just really unfortunate. And would you believe me if I said I hadn't even gotten to the worst part yet? It's been sitting in front of us the whole time. I've mentioned it, but I never pointed it out. That's right, this killer's power is also completely reliant on locker RNG. Let's be real, when you started watching, you probably didn't assume Dredge was that bad. But at this point, now you're questioning how it could get any worse. I mean, the way I described it, you would think even if locker placements were perfect, this killer's power would still be shit. But locker spawns are also entirely unreliable, depending on what map you're on. Most maps probably have at least a couple locker dead zones, where you just won't be able to patrol the gens, exit gates, or totems that are nearby. And God forbid you're chasing somebody and you just broke a pallet and you want to teleport to catch back up to them. Oops, sorry fucker, there's no locker over there. Gotta walk all the way up. And it's at this point that I start wondering why I'm not playing a different killer. And I don't want to sound like I just hate Dredge and think he's terrible. There's just so many parts of his kit and design that are way worse than they should be, and I don't think that's fair to him. I rarely see anyone else talk about killers in this deconstructive way like this, so I wanted to give it a try on a killer that not a lot of people talk about, but I see significant flaws in. But hey, if you watched this far, I'm actually curious to hear if you have any ideas how to fix Dredge. I'm not too confident in my Dredge ideas since I'm not a Dredge player and I'm not as passionate about him as I am about Trickster, but I just want to try to get a conversation going about Dredge since I feel like he's been forgotten over time. So let's get into the solutions segment now so I can try to get Dredge up to par with better killers. I think the most important thing to take into account when buffing Dredge is that his power is always going to be map reliant regardless of what you do. Since he's teleporting to lockers, that means the maps have to have good locker placements. And I don't think that's necessarily a problem, I just don't think the locker teleports should also be incredibly weak. So I'm going to start by improving his locker teleports first. The first thing I suggest is to decrease the time it takes to exit lockers by around 20%, regardless of whether it's locked or unlocked. This wouldn't save you much time overall, but it would just make it so precise teleports are more likely to result in a hit than they are currently, which I think is good. I think it's pretty much always a good thing to make changes that benefit people who are accurate with their powers. The next thing I would do is increase his teleport speed to 25 meters per second while outside of Nightfall, and round his teleport speed during Nightfall up to 40 meters per second. Map traversal that is also map reliant should not be slow, so I decided to make it incredibly fast during and outside of Nightfall to compensate for the fact that the locker placements are just not going to be perfect on every map you play on. But as long as the teleport speed is fast enough to be worth using, then that should be enough, I think. My final change to locker teleports is a bit more experimental, but I think it could help Dredge a lot. I would make it so when he teleports to a locker, he gets a brief boost of speed just like Sadako does when she teleports to a TV. This would make teleporting to lockers to down and injure survivors not only more effective, but also more fun to do because you would get those big lunges coming out of lockers that are really fun. It would also kind of make up for maps with bad locker positioning by making it so you don't lose too much distance when you teleport to a locker that's too far from where you're trying to go. So that's all the changes I would make to locker teleports, so I'm going to move on to Nightfall and locks now. The first thing I'd do is to decrease the charge requirement to activate Nightfall to 180 charges instead of the current 300. So not only would this make Nightfall's passive charge rate way faster than it is right now, this would also make every basic attack and hook you get much more impactful when it comes to charging Nightfall. But I don't really like powers that charge passively without you having to do something to earn them, so I would also decrease the charge bonus you get for injured survivors to half a charge a second instead of 3/4 of a charge per second. This doesn't really change much in practice, but it just compensates for how much I lowered the initial activation condition to begin with. I also made another change to Nightfall that brought out the horror aspects more while also improving the gameplay loop. This was to make it so you could only apply locks during Nightfall, and they would also deactivate when Nightfall ends. When I say they deactivate, I don't mean they break, I just mean they would disarm themselves and you'd have to reapply them next time Nightfall starts. They would still permanently break if the Dredge breaks them himself, but otherwise they would be fine. This would make Nightfall much more of a chaotic time where survivors have to scramble to lock all the doors because Dredge's teleports during this time are much faster and he can do them more often. Compare that to now where survivors can just lock the doors at any time whenever it's convenient and it's not really that scary at all. And believe it or not, I don't have anything to change about the Remnant. I think it provides cool gameplay opportunities and is very unique to Dredge, but it doesn't have any real problems that stick out that would need a buff. But the last thing I'm going to change about Dredge's stats is a rework to his teleport cooldown. Instead of just having a flat 12-second cooldown every time you use a teleport, I opted to give him a token recharge system similar to how Bubba's power works, where every 4 seconds you get one token that you can use for any teleport, whether to the Remnant or to lockers. This would actually encourage Dredge players to use their power more often, and by extension, get better at using their power, which I think is a good thing. Abilities with long cooldowns only encourage players to do the most safe option available at the time, which in this case would just result in more zoning with the Remnant, which isn't really fun for anyone. When players have the option to use their teleport more frequently, that means they will use their teleport more frequently, which is good. And that's about all I have to say on the stats of Dredge's base kit, but I would also appreciate if the devs maybe looked at the Nightfall lighting as well, like I mentioned earlier. Maybe doing something similar to the Lights Out modifier, or maybe even something like this. Can you just imagine running around in a map when it's this dark out? I think this would really bring out some creepy moments. But if this is too dark, then maybe we can try something like this. I mean, just look how nice this looks. This is really pleasant to look at, and it's dark out, which would signify that it's nightfall. And fuck it, the sky's the limit, why not make a daytime version as well? If you're gonna have a day-night cycle power, it would actually be cool to have a proper looking day-night cycle in the game. I understand that's a lot of effort, but it would really amplify the aesthetic of this killer to a whole new level. And the last thing I do to Dredge is decrease the volume of the sound effects he produces as he's walking, just as, you know, one little quality of life bonus. But now I'll move on to add-ons too, since it's only fair that I leave some ideas on the table to go with my base kit that I suggested. First things first, we've got Fallen Shingle, which increases Nightfall's charge rate by 15% while you're holding your power. Dredge has several Nightfall charge rate add-ons, and I think this one is the worst of the bunch because it only affects a short period of time and it's a minimal amount. If you watched my Trickster video, you'll know I'm not a big fan of duplicate add-ons, so I try to get rid of them when I can find them. And for this one, I decided to give it a new effect, which increases the duration of the movement speed bonus when exiting a locker by 25%. This is basically just a toned down version of Bloody Fingernails for Sadako, but for Dredge, which means I don't really have to explain it that much. Next up, we have another add-on that I don't have much to say about, Hattie's Calendar, which decreases the time it takes to exit a locked locker by 1 second. This is a simple change. Since I already made the add-on partially base kit, I'll just tone down the add-on's effect to 0.5 seconds to match. Next up is Malthinker's Skull, which increases the charge rate of Nightfall per injured survivor by 66%. This add-on is currently incredibly strong due to just how much it increases Nightfall's charge rate, but since I made Nightfall charge so fast already, I don't want this to be a meta pick the way it is right now. That said, I did a pretty simple change where I just decreased the charge rate bonus from 66% to 50%. And that might not sound like a lot when I write it down like that, but since that's a lower percent of a lower number, it's actually a more significant downgrade than you'd think, going from 1.25 charges per second per injured survivor down to just 0.75 charges per second per injured survivor. Next up is War Helmet, which increases the duration of Killer Instinct caused by your teleports during Nightfall by 1.5 seconds. Let's be honest here, has anyone ever run a Killer Instinct duration add-on on any killer? I'm pretty sure the answer is no. And the reason for that is that Killer Instinct durations are usually fine the way they are, and that's no different for Dredge. So instead, I decided to borrow an effect from a later add-on, which causes survivors who come into contact with the Remnant to become exhausted for 15 seconds. This is a simple and relatively niche, but also strong effect that I think would fit this rarity just fine. And it also means that I don't have to come up with a unique add-on effect, which I suck at. Next is Automarian Writing, which decreases teleport recharge time by 4 seconds when Nightfall is inactive. I really like this add-on because it lets you teleport more often, but it obviously wouldn't work with the token recharge system that I suggested, so I give it a minor rework to compensate for that. Now it would instead decrease the recharge time of each token by 1 second when Nightfall is inactive. This one's pretty simple, it doesn't fundamentally change too much, and it maintains its appeal, which is a good thing, I think. Next is Destroyed Pillow, which acts as an opposite of Automarian Writing and decreases the teleport recharge time by 2.5 seconds during Nightfall. The only reason I'm even suggesting a change to this one is because it wouldn't work with the base kit I suggested, but otherwise it's fine. I decided to take the lazy route yet again and borrow another effect from a later add-on, this time increasing the teleport speed outside of Nightfall by 5 meters per second. This would just be a simple, good add-on. Not much else to say. Next up is Boat Key, which increases teleport speed outside of Nightfall by 5 meters per second, and also causes all active locks to immediately break when all generators are completed. Now you're starting to see where I copied homework from, so let's just get into the rework. My reworked version removed the teleport speed bonus, but made it so whenever Nightfall ends, all active locks are permanently broken, instead of when the exit gates are powered. This would just be a particularly good time save add-on, since you wouldn't have to worry about breaking the locks yourself. Plus, the threat of this add-on would make survivors have to be much more careful about what lockers they actually put locks on, because if they put a lock on a locker that you don't end up using, they might get screwed later. Next up, we have Field Recorder, which causes Nightfall to automatically activate at the start of the trial and when all generators are repaired. It also causes survivors who come into contact with the Remnant to become exhausted for 15 seconds. There's nothing wrong with this add-on, but since I borrowed that last effect for an earlier add-on, I don't see a reason for it to stay on this one. So for my rework, I just removed that part, and we're gonna move on to the next one. The final add-on is Iridescent Wooden Plank, which causes all survivors to become exposed for the last 12 seconds of Nightfall. This add-on is really gimmicky, as you only benefit from the last couple seconds of Nightfall, which means you either have to wait until then for an insta-down, or just get lucky. I decided to keep the exposed effect, but reworking it as something that was more practical and always useful. The new effect I gave it is so that when you teleport to a locker, survivors within 12 meters of it become exposed for 8 seconds. This would make locker teleports in Chase very dangerous, but since it activates when you actually teleport inside the locker, it would give survivors some time to get away, and would also give more benefits to locking the lockers since it would take longer to come out and thereby run out the exposed timer more. And that's it. I don't really have anything else to say about Dredge at this point. I'm really curious to see what you fellas have to say about this character because I had a lot of fun making this video. I hope as I keep doing these kind of videos, I can open conversations on characters that not a lot of people talk about. I know when it comes to behavior that dev time isn't infinite and not all killers are going to get very much love these days, but at the very least, a man can dream, you know? If you want to see more videos like this, please do consider leaving a comment, liking, subscribing, hitting all the bells and whistles, all that. I would really appreciate it. And just, keep the conversation going in the comments. I love discussing game balance. It's very interesting. But for now, that's it. Happy Pride Month to the only DBD killer who comes out of the closet.